coffee, big cup, and hello. Welcome back to another episode of the Gilmore Way Podcast. We've often said in the past that the cornerstone of this show is really the dynamic between Lorelai and Rory. And for the most part, it is. But that really centers around the friendship that they have with one another. And I emphasize the word friendship tonight because that's what we're going to be talking about. Lorelai and Rory are mother and daughter, but they've always considered themselves to be friends first. And so the focus of our conversation tonight is going to be on female friendships, the female friendships that we see in the show, the psychology behind them, why female friendships are good and beneficial for all of us stemming from early childhood into adulthood and until senior citizenship and the time comes that we depart this earth. But there's so much to be said about it. So tonight we're going to break that down and talk about why female friendships are good, why they're a supportive measure, and something that we should all strive for to have within our own individual lives. That being said, we're going to kick things off with our synopsis after a shameless plug to
like, to subscribe, to feed the algorithm gods, because we're all at their mercy.
Mm-hmm.
And also, one last reminder, this is a spoilers all podcast. So if you don't want to know what happens with these characters and these friendships, you may want to bow out now.
Yep. But let's kick it off with our synopsis tonight. We start with episode 7 of season 2, Like Mother and Daughter. Rory is approached by the guidance counselor about her social habits at school and is encouraged to join other students at lunch instead of reading with her headphones on. She asks to join a table the following day at lunch, and it happens to be the table of one of Chilton's most elite sororities, the Puffs. Once Paris gets wind that Rory is in with the Puffs, she's desperate to get puffed herself because every female member of her family was in this sorority, and Rory assists in making an introduction. When her initiation in the headmaster's office is broken up by Charleston and Chilton security, Rory stands up for herself and delivers an impressive speech about the ridiculous accusations and standards that allows her to escape suspension. Meanwhile, Lorelai is similarly encouraged to be more social and participate in Chilton events, so she joins the Booster Club and helps them plan a fashion show fundraiser that she hosts at the inn.
Season 2, Episode 8, is the ins and outs of inns. Lorelai and Suki are starting to make plans and moves for their own inn when Mia Bass, the owner of the Independence Inn, returns to town. But Mia's reaction to Lorelai telling her their plans is unexpected, and Mia drops the bombshell that she might be looking to sell the inn when they leave. The independence is so foundational to Lorelai's sense of self, and it holds so many memories, that the idea of it no longer being there for her sends her into a tailspin, and she takes it out on Suki, accusing her of being unreliable as a business partner. When Emily gets wind that Mia is back in town, she returns to the Independence Inn to meet her and confront her about why she never sent Lorelai home, and asks for pictures from that time in Lorelai and Rory's lives. Jess causes a kerfuffle in town by drawing the chalk outline of a body and putting up fake crime scene tape outside of Dosey's, and Taylor and the other townies give Luke grief about his behavior, which causes Rory to confront him about it. Rory has also been asked by her grandmother to sit for a painted portrait to hang in Richard's study to cheer him up because work is still upsetting him.
Yeah. There's a lot that we can both say about this, but I'm going to lead us off with just the most basic of questions that we'll elaborate on as we go. But what do you feel and what do you think is just the most basic and the cornerstone of any female friendship as we see it in the show and in real life?
Trust is a huge one, I think. And communication as well. I think I've said this before, but communication is key in any relationship, whether it be romantic or platonic. But yeah, trust and loyalty are huge when it comes to friendship as well. So, a huge part of a friendship is knowing that someone will be there for you and that you can confide in them and that they will keep your confidence. So I think, at a general high level, those are sort of like 3 that I would like to highlight. Oh, and I guess spending time together, like really enjoying each other's company and doing bonding activities could also be said to be very important.
Mm-hmm. It's true. I think there's more of a parallel between friendships and relationships than people think there are. And I feel like there's a lot of commonality between the efforts that you need to put forth to make sure that a relationship is working, but also that a friendship works. And so you highlighted some of them, but I think a lot of them are just true across the board. You need to be communicative with your friends. You need to put in that effort. You need to make sure that you're spending time with them. Bonding and trust is also very important. Loyalty goes along with that. But that's what really struck me as I was preparing for us to record this episode, just how much overlap there is between what you need to make a relationship work and what you need to make a friendship work. And I thought about Lorelai a lot too, because I feel like and Rory, but I feel like the two of them broached relationships and friendships in a very black and white way and didn't really see or notice the similarities that were there between the efforts again that you need to put forth to make that work. And that's why I think a lot of the times Lorelai and Rory were not as good of friends to the women in their lives that they should have been. And I wish they had noticed some of those overlaps, because I feel like it really would have just helped them to garner and foster better friendships.
That's a really good point. You know, I would say that my boyfriend is among my best friends. You know, we have a good friendship that underpins our relationship. We were acquaintances and D&D level friends before we were together. So that goes to show that, you know, most good relationships are built on friendship. So you have to have a similar approach to both. And as you mentioned, another character that's a really great example of this is Lorelai and her relationship with Luke. You know, it was a friends to lovers kind of relationship. And Luke is a very different kind of friend to her than Suki, but nonetheless, that was what really underpinned their entire chemistry and compatibility, was that underlying understanding of loyalty and trust and showing up for each other time and time again. And it's unfortunate that we do see our characters, Lorelai and Rory specifically, kind of putting those romantic relationships over their friendships, maybe taking their friendships for granted sometimes, assuming that they'll always be there and always be the same, while putting more effort into those relationships with the men in their life. Not always, but you can definitely see that happening.
Yeah, I think Lorelai was definitely a lot more guilty of that than Suki was, because even when she gets into a relationship with Jackson, she still makes Lorelai a priority, and she still makes not only her personal friendship with her a priority, but also the business relationship that they have. And she understands that both are just still so important and significant. So I think I commend Suki for really just maintaining what I deem to be just a wonderful balance between all of those relationships that she's juggling. Because we start off early in the show with a newfound, like, that relationship with Jackson is very new for her. And there's going to be a lot of complexity as you're getting to know somebody in that way. But she doesn't curtail her friendship with Lorelai. She makes sure that it is steadfast, that it is still there, and that she is putting in the work to show Lorelai that she is still present and available to her as a friend whenever she needs. Lorelai doesn't do the same for her. I feel like Lorelai can get very caught up in her men in her own life, and so she can disregard Suki and the other people in her life that mean a lot to her, and people that are relying on her, that are counting on her. And so she falls short in that way. And Rory does too. Apple not falling far from the tree, perhaps, but it's very transparent and clear to me that like our Gilmore women get too caught up with men sometimes, and they don't give their friendship the effort and the care that it's due.
I would tend to agree with that. It's funny because Amy has said in the past that she doesn't want us to pay attention so much to the guys. She doesn't want us to be taking sides and picking teams and focusing so much on the romance, because the heart of the show is supposed to be mother-daughter relationships, family dynamics, and female friendship. And yet somehow those always take a back seat in our characters' actions. So I think it's the way that it's written that it demonstrates to us that our characters are kind of maybe selfish and myopic at times when it comes to being as good of friends to their friends as their friends are to them.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, you make an excellent point about Suki and Jackson's early relationship. It's actually kind of a mean comment from Lorelai when they're talking about her and Max that prompts Suki to take a look at her own love life and take the plunge and ask Jackson out. And then Lorelai also helps in terms of being a support for their first date. She helps her get ready, and she agrees to the double date from hell. She tries to keep Rune occupied despite his rudeness. Like, you know, she tries to be there for her bestie and tries to set them up. She sits at the counter rather, talking to Luke so that they can have a little bit of alone time. You know, that's good wing woman behavior. But once Suki is off with Jackson and sort of has somebody else as a support in her life, Lorelai backs off a little and stops paying so much attention to their relationship unless it becomes directly relevant to her.
Mm-hmm. Who would you say does better in terms of being a friend, Lorelai or Rory?
Oh, this is such a hard one. My initial response was going to be Rory, but I don't know if that's right. I'm just sort of thinking of Rory with Paris, especially, because Paris is one of those prickly people who has a hard time making and keeping deep connections with people and being able to trust people in her life and having people stay loyal to her. And despite wherever they're at in their friendship at any given time, Rory shows up for Paris time and time again. She helps her go out with Tristan. She loans her mother's clothes. She helps her study. Paris repays the favor when things get sticky between Dean and Jess, and there's the rub. You know, she kind of really steps up for Rory in that moment. And then, of course, there's the Jamie situation, helping her with her first date with Jamie, and the support she provides in the big one after she doesn't get into Harvard and is blaming herself and her sexuality for that, which is, you know, problematic, and it's kind of its own whole topic that we'll have to touch on some other time. But that's a really great moment. You know, they're in the middle of a big fight. There's been a betrayal of trust. And despite Paris's behavior toward Rory at that moment, Rory still sits with her as long as she needs and like lets her cry on her shoulder. So I would say maybe at least for the first 3 seasons, Rory maybe demonstrates more direct good friendship. But Lorelai maybe is a little more steady over the course of the series, I guess. Okay. I don't even know. They none of the friendships on the show are perfect. Mm-hmm. You know, I would venture to say that perhaps Suki is the best friend on the show, but even she has her moments of being a bit of a jerk, like when she sort of blames Lorelai or drags her into the conversation about not wanting 4 and 4 with Jackson. Like she doesn't want to be honest with him and just tell him that that's not what she wants, and so she sort of throws Lorelai under the bus. So she's got her moments as well. So none of them are perfect. Yeah. But I think Lorelai has maybe the fewest slip-ups where she's like a true jerk to Suki. She's maybe not there for her as tightly as we would hope. And Rory comes through for someone who is actively awful to her more often. And so it's one of those questions that maybe doesn't have a perfect, easy answer. Do you have a different take on it than I do? Because I'm struggling to make a decision on that.
Yeah. They both misstep. I mean, and I'll highlight two really big standout examples for me, one stemming from each of our Gilmore Girls. And this is more of like a business slip up too, but I'm going to include it because I think it was just also a bad friend moment when Suki and Lorelai are trying to open their own inn and get that running. And so they're arranging for delivery of a stove that is being shipped in from Canada. And they were, counting on her to be there to sign for the delivery and make it happen. And unfortunately, she wasn't able to be there, so the stove ends up getting shipped back, and it instigates this fight between the two of them. And I understand that these are two grown women who have things going on in their lives, um, and I'm not even gonna say like this is a business, this is your responsibility, but it felt like a really bad friend misstep where you guys did not communicate well. You didn't understand what each of you had going on in your lives, but I will fault Lorelai even more so for this one because she knows that Suki is a mother, that she has young children, that she's not always able to be present even when she should be. And Suki should have communicated that better when she couldn't make it, but I hated the blow up that came from that because it's like it's not ideal, but there's a resolution to this problem. And now you're letting this be a real divisive element to your friendship, at least in the short term, until you figure this out. It could have been easily avoided, but I hated the blame that Lorelai was putting on Suki and saying, like, almost, this is solely your fault and I didn't do anything wrong. There's blame to share there. So I feel like that could have been communicated better. And that was just one really bad instance that stood out to me. Rory's is even more egregious to me. When Lane runs her hands through Rich's hair and then subsequently has a meltdown about it because she knows that was probably not okay and something that she absolutely should not have done. But she flees to Rory's house because she needs her best friend in that moment, and her best friend is not there. And Rory had other plans, but overall, what we see in that season was that, yeah, like Rory was not being a good friend to Lane. She had gotten very wrapped up in Dean at that point. I'm not saying that it's not understandable for someone her age when you're a teenager and that's your first fling and your first real relationship. But I think the writers were trying to make it very clear to us that Rory was neglecting her friendship. And Lane noticed and was on the fallout of that. And I applaud Lane for calling her out on her BS and saying, I need my best friend. I need you here. I understand that you're pursuing this relationship with Dean, and that's awesome, and I'm supportive of that. But every time I try and talk to you, you're half listening to me if you're listening at all. I feel like I don't have your full attention. I don't have your time. And that's not what I need from you. That's not what our friendship has ever been, nor what it should be, nor is it what I want it to be. And I love Lane calling her out on it because sometimes I think when your friend is faltering in that way, maybe you need to do that and you need to say, like, I need you here more and I need you to be present. And I love Rory's response in saying, and just being a good listener and understanding, like, okay, I hear what my friend is saying. Maybe I haven't been there for her as much as I should have been or in the way that she needs. So I'm going to try and do better for her. I don't know if Rory ever actually does because, again, self-centered. But she at least is listening to what Lane has to say. And I love Lane's truthfulness and honesty in trusting her best friend to be on the receiving end of something that she may not want to hear, but hoping that she'll be receptive to it anyway.
Those are both excellent examples. And I have some thoughts and counterpoints to go along with those. I totally agree that Rory needed to hear what Lane had to say about, like, you know, when we're together, you should be present here with me. That was in fact something that Rory needed to work on in herself. You're right. The writers wanted to make it clear that she was caught up and was being selfish and kind of immature in that moment. And there was that apology and reconciliation. And you're right. I don't know if Rory actually got better at this. It's just that the writers didn't show us any other instances of it, really. Just because they didn't show us, though, doesn't mean that it wouldn't happen. But yeah, just to play a little bit of devil's advocate, though, when it comes to Rory and Lane, Lane especially might just need to kind of accept that the nature of their friendship has to change. They've been besties since they were 4. And they're sort of exclusively each other's best friends. Neither of them is shown at the beginning to have substantial relationships with other people outside of that friendship, except for Rory and Lorelai, which is a very different dynamic. Yeah. And so it might be Lane trying to hold on to the past a little too much at times, where it's like, you know, you used to be all mine and now you're not. And so she definitely needs to learn how to, like, share Rory a little bit better, perhaps. Like, the circumstances that led up to that, Rory was the asshole. Let's put it that way. Like, she really was not being there when she was with Lane. But Lane also has to get used to the fact that the nature of their relationship is changing and that she's not going to have exclusive rights. I know they say in that moment that they've got dibs on each other because they were there first, but that's not how all relationships work. That's not a healthy dynamic. It's important to maintain those relationships and not let them completely lapse, because you still need that support, and a friendship that old is worth working for, right? But Lane only has so many outlets. She has a stricter home life, and Rory is someone she trusts implicitly. And I think maybe her lack of additional friendships, especially female friendships, might have had an impact on her. And it's kind of unfortunate that they relied so heavily on each other. And then going back to Incredible Sinking Lorelai's with the Lorelai Suki situation, I'm almost more sympathetic to Lorelai in that situation. I don't know that, like, you said that there's blame to be shared there, but Suki was the one who insisted on being there, and she messed up. She was the one who didn't keep track of things. She's notoriously flaky, even in the ins and outs of inns. When they want to have a meeting with Fran, Suki is very late because she has this this rabbit hole that she goes down. She's like, last week I made a blueberry glaze for the souffle, and I was making a raspberry souffle, and some people come to the to the Independence at the same time, the same day each week, and I didn't want them to have the same dessert, so I had to start from scratch, you know? And Lorelai lets it slide, and she's like, you know, you're a perfectionist, and that's why they call you the maestro. She lets it slide because she just knows that Suki is that way and that there's not much to be done for it. But she sits there waiting for her at Weston's for, what was it, 2 slices of cake and a rum ball? You know, that's a decent amount of time to be sitting waiting for your friend to have a business meeting, right? Suki is just very flighty, and Lorelai was kind of right to call her out on the fact that, like, you know, this isn't the Independence anymore. There is no safety net. There is no, like, no one to do this stuff for you. This is our responsibility now. And because you have a baby, I'm doing so much of everything else that, like, I don't even have time for a hair appointment. Like, I know you have a baby, and I know this wasn't part of the plan. And Lorelai, of all people, should know what it's like to have a baby and work at the same time. But that also doesn't give Suki the right to just you know, flake out all the time.
Mm-hmm.
And, you know, it was kind of something I think Suki maybe needed to hear, where it's just like, there have to be moments where you lean on your support system so that you can do what you need to do as well. Like, you have a husband and you have, well, I don't know if they still have their nanny or their wet nurse at that point, like their midwife,
Mm-hmm.
but you know, they've got potentially other people or carers that can step in so that she can at least do what she needs to do. So, like you said, there is some blame on both sides, but like, I don't think Lorelai was at fault in that situation. I feel like her frustration was justified when she's lived with well over a decade of Suki constantly being late and not showing up and not pulling her weight. So I can't totally fault her for that one. But yeah, I mean, she could have maybe handled it more delicately. And the one thing that does bother me about that episode is that I don't think that there was an apology or a reconciliation or a resolution to it. And they just let it hang, and then it's forgotten entirely. And nobody really does anything different or better. I guess Suki's behavior does kind of improve. Like, I don't think we see her being quite so flighty anymore. Like, maybe that's just a case of the writers toning certain elements of characters' personalities down a little bit in the later seasons. I think that happens for a lot of characters. And Suki is one of those characters who gets less erratic and less floopy as time goes on. So maybe she took it to heart, but we don't actually see any resolution to that.
Yeah. And I think conflict resolution is a very important part. Again, I'm just going to beat the horse dead saying this. There's an insane amount of overlap with how you approach friendships and relationships and even familial relationships. Conflict resolution is a very important part of all of those things. If you are having problems with a significant other or a friend or a family member, and you're going to just, stamp down on it and try and put that problem aside and not address it, it's probably going to blow up in your face one day when you're just not addressing the issues that you have with that person. Talk about it. Air your grievances, communicate. I wish Lorelai and Suki had done it a little bit better instead of always just saying, like, no, it's okay, we're good, we'll move on. Because then problems arise again, and maybe some of those things wouldn't have continued to be issues if you had just addressed it the first time.
Yeah, I mean, they have that fight in Ins and Outs of Inns, but it's about a much smaller thing, right? It's about Suki being late for a meeting, and then Lorelai's emotional overreaction to Mia's news sort of causes her to transfer her emotional reaction from one thing to another because she just can't like compartmentalize what's happening here, and she starts kind of freaking out about Suki not being a reliable partner, and it freaks her out about starting a business with this person who she needs to be able to trust. And I think that is the biggest part of both of those fights in season 2 and season 4 is trust. But in season 2, it was a much smaller infraction, and they did have that resolution, whereas they didn't later. And so, yeah, it would have been better for them to show it to us narratively, to show what a healthy reconciliation in a situation looks like.
I agree. I'm going to put a rewind button on us and take us back from adult female friendships to when we first see them starting out, and perhaps starting to talk about a little bit of the psychology and the importance of them from an early age. What do you think about female friendships from an elementary school age, when we're toddlers, when we're children, when we start developing friendships within school, across the board with boys, girls, whomever. But do you think there's an importance to having female friendships being established that early on? And if so, why?
I think it's an important thing to have any friendships at that age. I don't know that female friendships get an exclusive priority necessarily, even for little girls. I wonder if maybe us being encouraged to have less of a gender essentialist idea about friendship from a young age might improve issues of the more toxic elements of femininity and masculinity, where we're just a little more understanding and communicative with everyone, not just people of our own sex. And not to mention a lot of stuff that I see about the psychology of friendship or conversations like this is really gendered, really extremely deeply what's the word, like stereotypically gendered. And I don't know that that's helpful to us as a society. I think it just sort of entrenches these ideas about boys and girls, and this is what boys do, and this is what girls do, and this is what's acceptable, and this is what's not acceptable. And it sort of forgets about a lot of kids who don't necessarily identify with either side. You know, there are a lot of very sensitive little boys and there are a lot of aggressive little girls. And so when we say that there's just two camps, there's this strict binary in how these kids behave and what they need out of friendship, that just, I think, reinforces the ideas of, you know, little girls can only play with little girls. So I think friendship in all of its forms are important. You know, I remember being a kid and having both boy and girl friends. I think I was predominantly hanging out with girls more, but I've always been someone who can foster good relationships with anyone I click with, not strictly females or males, women or men. And there's a difference too between sort of like biological females and women, right? Or girls. And so it's just too limiting to put people into these boxes. But teaching our kids how to form friendships, how to maintain them, how not to bully other kids is very important on the whole.
Yeah, I would agree. And it's something that continues to pop up the more I read about this is just the whole concept of exclusion. And I feel like we see that, unfortunately, I'll call, you know, you and I both identify as women, so I'll call us out on it. I think that's something that is seemingly, and research backs it up, a lot more prevalent in girls and women than it is with boys and men. But just the whole concept of exclusivity, and that hurts my heart. Like, but it's there and it exists. Like, I think back to my childhood, and unfortunately, I was on the receiving end of that. I feel like every one of us was most likely on the receiving end of some sort of exclusivity at some point, from friends, from peers, acquaintances, whomever. But I don't understand why we do it to one another. You know, I wish I could formulate a clear-cut answer as if to say, like, why, but even if I could, it still wouldn't excuse that behavior. But just the fact that it's such a prevalent thing, that we're so cliquey in nature and that we're so judgmental from an early age, from adolescence, with who we want to spend time with, who we deem as worthy of spending time with, who we want to invite into our circle. It's really disastrous, and it's the fallout from it can just be significant and life ending, unfortunately, as some, you know, in the most extreme of cases, which is, you know, I don't even want to go there. But we do it to each other. And I still struggle to understand why.
Yeah, child psychology is an interesting one. I only have some very surface level understandings of psychology at that particular age level. And it's interesting because there do seem to be patterns in behaviors at that age that perpetuate these issues, and it just sort of keeps going and going and going. So it's there's no clear cut answer. as to how to get kids to not be terrible to each other. For some reason, kids suck sometimes, it's a constant thing that generations have had to deal with. And I don't know whether it's nature or nurture sometimes, but yeah, kids are tough. And the only childhood friend we know of for Rory that she maintains any real relationship with is Lane. And we don't see hardly anybody from Lorelai's childhood. We only get Chris really from adolescence and teen years. So the fact that Rory and Lane sort of found each other as 4-year-olds at kindergarten, that's an interesting dynamic, but we don't have any evidence that either of them was really social with anyone else. And I think that probably plays into a lot of Rory's personality in terms of her introversion and preference of being alone. So there could be elements of that. And we also don't know of any bullying, like we see those catty girls at the beginning of the pilot where it's like, she's doing the assignment as if doing your homework is somehow totally uncool. But we don't hear of any other incidences of Rory being made fun of as a kid or anything. So that's interesting. I think it gets more interesting and more complex as kids age and come into adolescence and their teen years, because there are so many more dynamics at play. That's when, sex ed starts becoming a thing and girls start liking boys. And that's when you start seeing the exclusion and the relational aggression, the gossip, all of these things just amplify and get 10 times more intense. Any thoughts on that?
I hate it. Again, I have to say, I don't understand why we do it to one another, because and it's hard because, we're both women in our 30s, and I feel like adults, obviously look back on this and, you're mature at this point, your brain is, fully developed. So I'm sure that plays a part in it as well. When, how can we expect kids and adolescents to behave in a way that we deem appropriate and establish these friendships and these connections when, puberty is going on and their hormones are raging and they have so much working against them in that sense. But I can understand why it just makes it all the more difficult for those really foundational friendships and relationships to develop, and why once they develop, for kids especially, why they're so hard to maintain, because it's not something that's singular to kids, but once you, like you said, once you get into that, girls start liking boys, or you start developing attractions for people, jealousy can develop, resentment, all of those just negative aspects and personality traits start coming into play, where I feel like to an extent it's beyond your control, but it's also not when you're a kid, because you have to learn how to process those feelings and emotions, move beyond them, and maturely respond to them. And so we can't, as adults, look at kids and expect them to have a perfect response to those feelings when they arise, because this is the first time they've ever had to encounter them. And I feel like that's another layer of what makes them not only establishing friendships, but just maintaining them so hard, like so much more difficult for kids, because they don't know how to do it. And that's where I think good parental role models also come into play, where if they can look at parents and adults and guardians, teachers in their lives, and see like a model relationship and model friendships from them, it can help them to do better themselves. But unfortunately, that's not always what children are able to see or get either. So it's just tough all around. And I don't excuse anything like bullying or, that level of bad behavior from kids, but I can understand all of the hardships that they're up against when they're trying to process their own emotions and how that affects their friendships.
Yeah, I think it's something we don't teach kids well enough. We were probably never taught well enough, and it never occurred to us to teach our kids until maybe fairly recently. But emotional instruction is is lacking, probably because we have a hard time with it. So modeling is important, but also knowing how to communicate these things to kids in a way that they can understand how these social dynamics work and how they can sort of modulate those emotions within themselves and how they can sort of interact with others better. So that's something to think about moving forward with future generations. But speaking of bullying, something I think is a really interesting topic that ties into female friendship is the relational aggression of one Francine Jarvis.
Oh,
we meet
Francie.
her, yeah, we meet her in Like Mother, Like Daughter as, the head of the Puffs. And then she comes back later in season 3 and, starts trouble. She starts manipulating the relationship, the friendship between Rory and Paris. She has a goal or goals that she wants to accomplish on the student council, and Paris is resistant to, her shallower wants and needs. And so she uses Rory and their friendship as a means to control Paris's behavior, which is just super messed up. So, yeah, her impact on their friendship is very interesting. Any particular takes on what happens to Rory and Paris's friendship and the fallout of that?
Oh, Francie. I mean, it's not the first like I'll say like pop culture is lauded with that sort of behavior. I mean, look at Mean Girls, which is based on Queen Bees and Wannabes, but
Which
Regina
I
George,
read, by the way.
yes. But Regina George and Francie Jarvis, girls got a lot in common there. I'm not surprised that Francie's behavior had the impact that it did on Rory and Paris's friendship, because they were already very academically competitive. They had already shown instances of being jealous with boys, and Paris being like, do you like Tristan because I like him, and that could diminish this friendship, and all of those normal, I say normal, but all of those things that, are common and that we expect to see and are prevalent within teenage female friendships were there for them. And I feel like Paris and Rory were trying to work through them because they could sense that there was a friendship there that could develop. And foundationally, that's also not who either one of them were. They weren't those stereotypical popular, prom queen-esque girls who were just going to be all about boys, who were dismissive of grades and academia and establishing those friendships. And it was there for them because for most of us it is, but I feel like the two of them were very good at being mature and processing what they were feeling and working through it. And I think that's why their friendship faltered from time to time, but at the end of the day, it held up. And as they got older, they were able to really solidify it because they worked through all of those problems that most of us have within friendships. And they, instead of running for the hills or giving up on a friendship, they made a commitment and an effort to make it work and still be a part of each other's lives.
Yeah, that's an interesting take. I don't know that I would have phrased it quite that way. And the thing that's running through my head right now is Paris attacking Rory during fencing. I'm like, is that really working through your emotions in a healthy way? I don't know. Like, this is, peak immature Paris in her behavior toward Rory with the student council and with the fencing incident, and them ultimately being called into Charleston's office, and well, then his sexist ideas about what they could possibly be fighting about. Good Lord.
About a boy, isn't it? Has to be about a boy, because what else could it be?
Paris, are you muttering? No, sir. Bitch, yes, you were. But yeah, you do make a good point, though, about the fact that they ultimately were able to persist in the friendship despite those harder times. And they're kind of really always there for each other because they saw something of themselves in each other. They recognized each other's most important like social identities and being like the smart girl and being at the top. And they used each other as motivation to get there. And they sort of brought each other back to life, or not back to life, but like back to where they should be, and helped each other and balanced each other in just the right ways. Like Paris was able to get Rory back on track when she got a little too boy crazy and lost sight of school and Harvard. And she was the one who sort of gave her a reality check about that. And Rory was able to help Paris with her social skills and her anxiety about relationships. Even though she doesn't have a ton of experience herself, she's at least, you know, a little more chill about it and can be like, Paris, you need to ditch the note cards and you need to wear some lipstick that has a color in it. So, you know, she was able to provide something to Paris that even Madeline and Louise couldn't seem to grasp because they got each other better and they recognized like the identity. That's the biggest thing, is validation and support of identity in their friendship. And that's what made it last. So I love that they're not that sort of stereotypical, you know, popular girl, catty, infighting, gossipy kind of friendship, because you got enough of that on One Tree Hill and Gossip Girl and, you know, every other teen show from the age. They were cut from a different cloth. And I don't know if it's just because they had primarily female writer directors, female showrunner, like maybe it was just Amy's particular vision of female friendship that really helped keep it out of that territory, or whether it was another writer. Maybe it was Daniel. I don't know. Like it was a writer's room, right? So it's hard to say, but I would imagine that Amy had quite a bit to do with it.
Mm-hmm.
I think that's an important note too, is to look at the behind the scenes, who's writing these characters and what does that say about our priorities and our perceptions when it comes to how we portray friendship on screen. You know, you reference Mean Girls, and if memory serves, it was written by a dude.
No, that was Tina
or was
Fey's.
that the direct? Well, did Tina Fey write it or did she direct it?
No, that was her. That was hers. It was
Was
based
Mark
on
Waters
Queen.
the direct? Well, yeah, I know that.
But yeah, yeah.
Yeah. In 2021, I was on our friend John's channel, and did a whole 2-hour stream about Mean Girls, and I read Queen Bees and Wannabes in preparation for that, so I know that part. But Mark Waters had a huge role in this. I can't remember whether he wrote or co-wrote or directed, but his brother is the guy who wrote Heathers.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
so again, true. Sort of like the male influence on the script or on the production presentation of these things is still there. Whereas, for example, a movie like Booksmart, I think it had like 3 female writers and a female director, and it just had some of the coolest like female empowerment and honest female friendship moments of any movie I've seen in recent memory. I mean, granted, I haven't seen everything out there. I'm still woefully behind with pop culture, but it makes a difference who is at the helm and who is making these decisions and these portrayals.
Yeah. I mean, I won't delve too much into it because that's just an entirely different topic of its own, but there are problems that arise when men write women. We see it in literature, we see it in television, we see it in film. Sometimes they can do it well. So I'm not going to make a blanket statement and say it's atrocious across the board, because it's not. There are men that can write women well and succeed. Most of the time it's pretty horrendous. So I agree with your statement that it does matter sometimes who is behind the scenes, who's producing, who's writing, the input that is had, especially when it's your own creative work. If something is being adapted, it matters because you want that to translate appropriately and in the way that you want it to as the creator of that content, and in a way that is going to allow your audience to learn from it in a way that's just beneficial for them going forward. So yes, that does matter. But I want us to kind of move on from children and adolescents now into friendships as adults. You know, what do you, I'll start off with a basic question. Do you think that adult female friendships are important? Are they something that, do you think, always translate over from adolescence? Or do you think there's more of a case of people establishing adult female friendships in their 20s, in their 30s, in their 40s with women who they had never previously known? And just what do you think are some of the benefits to the concept of it on the whole as
Right.
we progress into adulthood?
Mm-hmm. I mean, obviously, there are a lot of times when our childhood friendships don't carry over because when we're young, we don't really know who we are yet. We spend a lot of years from our teens through our 20s getting to know ourselves and solidifying our identities. And so the people who really got us when we were younger may not be the people who get us later in life. And so it's only natural that we should shed some friendships and make some new ones. That's the cycle of life. And even sometimes friends from our 20s don't make it to our 30s. And sometimes friends from our 30s don't make it to our 40s. It's just about where you're at in life. And there are a lot of circumstances externally that can impact your friendships. Like, for example, I moved provinces when I went to school, and some of my childhood best friends didn't stay in the province either. My like best childhood friend moved to Germany to go to school, and I moved to British Columbia, and one of our other good friends stayed in Ontario. And then I had to make all new friends at 18, basically. I stayed in contact with a few people, at least superficially, for a few years. And I feel like, if I went back to that childhood best friend now, it'd be like, almost like nothing had happened. We'd have a lot to catch up on, but the connection would still be there. I saw her a few years ago at a wedding, and it was like, it's still great, right? But yeah, I made a lot of new friends in my dorm. And then when I was in my junior year of university, I joined a sorority, which is like, congratulations, here are 80 new female friends. And you will get new female friends cycling through every year. And there are 7 other sororities on campus for you to choose friends from. It's kind of delightful on that level. And I'm just going to preface this by saying that the system in Canada is very different than the system in the US. It has a very different vibe than what you see in movies. So, I didn't have like a house bunny situation going on. I feel like my experience was a lot more wholesome than that. So yeah, your 20s are where you start to make some of your friendships that are more likely to last because, like I said, you're a little more certain of who you are. And it's not always the case because then I moved back from British Columbia, and so my college best friend still lives out there. And we see each other, once a year when we can, except through obviously the last few years where travel was not so easy. But, her family, she's got some here in Ontario, and I have some family back in BC. So we'll see each other when we are able to. And that's also another friendship that sort of miraculously feels just the same when we've spent years apart and then come back together and hang out. It's like, it's wonderful when it happens. But it's not only female friendships that happens for me with. And it's interesting. Like, we made friends in our 30s. So we'll see how long we last. Let's start the timer. We'll see how far that goes. But I think that might be why Rory and Paris managed to keep their friendship so strong and going for so long, because as they were really fighting out their identities through college, they lived together. So they spent a lot of time with each other, and they learned how to manage their dynamic. Whereas when you see her and Lane in the revival, they're still obviously good friends, but there's something different, almost lacking in their friendship that she doesn't have with Paris. It's not as as interesting to watch their friendship anymore. It's almost like they assume that their childhood friendship would just carry over and be just as good without that kind of work. And I think you kind of see a similar dynamic with Lorelai and Suki, where Suki has her friendship with Lorelai and their partnership with the Dragonfly take a backseat to her marriage, and she kind of disappears off the page. Granted, I know that the meta reason for that is Melissa McCarthy's availability, but it goes to show that, like, no matter how long you've been friends with someone and how close that relationship is, it can always dissipate, but it can also always come back together and still provide something important. And when you truly know someone and trust them and work to maintain some level of communication somewhere, that friendship is more likely to endure. So female friendships are great, but so are male friendships. And I don't like to limit myself to feeling one way about female friendship and another about male friendship, because, you know, good friends are good friends.
Mm-hmm.
I guess that's my take on it. That may not be the most, like I think the show wants us to prioritize female friendship. And I think, you know, there are certain feminists out there and feminist ideals that would say that, like, for women, our female friendships are our most important. But I don't necessarily espouse that idea. So what do you think?
I would agree. I mean, my best childhood friend and a person that I spent pretty much all of my elementary school time with, like, was a boy. Like, you know, he and I were inseparable when we were kids. We were always just hanging out on weekends, you know, riding bikes, going to movies, you know, um, just doing all of those, you know, basic friends things together. And so, yeah, I think that female friendships are important, but they're not singularly important. I think friendships on the whole deserve equal recognition. Again, whether your best friend is someone who is of the same gender as you or not, across the board, like, those relationships and those friendships are just important. So, and they're worth equal measure and worth you putting in the same effort into maintaining them and making them work. So, um,
I
I'm
agree
not,
with that.
yeah, I'm not dismissing female friendships on the whole, because there is scientific research and knowledge that backs up why they're important. But the same can be said for male friendships and the whole concept of, like, bromances and, you know, guys having that same support system in their lives from, you know, their male friends. Across the board, just having a support system is irreplaceable,
Yeah,
regardless of gender. So if it's there and if you have people in your life that are like that, fight for them, regardless of how they identify or whatnot. Just those relationships are invaluable.
I agree. I think, you know, the more it sounds kind of bad, but, like, the more friends you have, the better. Not from a popularity standpoint, but just from an expansion of your worldview standpoint. And I also think that it is possibly harmful to assume that female friendships, especially among females, are superior simply because women are more in touch with their emotions and, you know, they're more nurturing and more intuitive. I think we need to tell men to be emotional and to be in tune with other people's body language and emotions and telltale signs, so that we don't raise further generations of dudes who can't talk about their feelings. I
Mhm.
think it just sort of entrenches those gender roles when we're so focused on them and when we assume that that's the default setting. Because, like I said, I have some friends who are fantastically sensitive men,
Mhm.
and I want to see more people like them in the world.
Yeah.
So I think we should encourage our little girls to be friends with little boys and to encourage those little boys to express their feelings more. So, I have another question for you.
Sure.
How do you think friendship, specifically female friendship, in the context of this particular discussion? There's lots more to talk about on friendship and individual relationships as we go forward, but considering this one's sort of focused on female friendships, how do you think that has changed our characters, let's say for the better?
Ooh. Again, our characters, and especially Rory, but Lorelai is guilty of this too. I can't say enough how I hate how self-centered they are. And I feel like a lot of the time, not all the time, but sometimes their friendships can really break them out of that, where Rory and Lorelai have to realize and reckon with the fact that it is not all about you. There are people in your life that matter too, and that have their own struggles going on that need your support. So it's not always about your problems and the immediacy of what you're struggling with. That's important, but you need to recognize that you need to be there and be present for other people too. I think it also just allows for a greater sense of just a better worldview, and compassion, with recognizing that someone's struggles may not be your own, and they may be something that you even dismiss as a struggle because you can't understand why that person is stressing over something that is seemingly so insignificant for you. I think we see that sometimes from Rory, where she is dismissive of what Lane has going on because in her mind, it's no harm, no foul. I don't understand why that's bothering you. But I feel like there's growth to be had there for both of our GG women on that front, from just allowing for better compassion within your friendship and then having that allow you to be a better support system to them. What do you think?
Yeah. We meet Lorelai as an adult, so she's a little more set and settled in her ways. I don't know how much her friendships help her grow. So I think we see it more with Rory. And I think Paris helps her grow academically. She gives her the useful information that she needs. And not only that, but she pushes her beyond herself. You know, she provides this model, this example of someone who like goes to sometimes extreme lengths to accomplish her goals. And so I think without her, Rory may have gotten complacent and maybe rested on her laurels a little bit in terms of like, oh, what I've always done will be enough to get me where I need to go in the future. But Paris shows her the error of her ways and helps her, you know, put in that extra effort. And that's potentially why, sadly, Rory kind of gets more than Paris out of life, because she coasted for a while and then Paris pushed her even further. And unfortunately, Paris gets sort of left behind in that dynamic as someone who's always been a striver. So, and then Rory sort of returns the favor in helping Paris grow emotionally. And Lane is the one that helps Rory grow emotionally or have like emotional epiphanies more often. You know, I think of when they're dyeing Lane's hair and Rory doesn't make it explicit to Lane, but she is telling or giving her advice in such a way as it helps her sort out her own feelings for Jess and Dean. And later, when Lane finds out she's pregnant, Rory's the one who's there consoling her and saying, like, you don't have to be perfect. Mothers aren't perfect. And it helps her come to a more empathetic position for her own mom. So, and helps her forgive Lorelai's transgression with Chris. So there's sort of a back and forth in what our friends provide to, or Rory's friends provide to her. And it's interesting because this is a dynamic we see in media a lot, where the best friend is there to support and buttress the protagonist, but they don't get much development or growth themselves. So we see a little more maybe from Paris than from Lane. We get Lane's sort of like rebellion arc that is, you know, one of the least satisfying conclusions in history. And and we do see Paris kind of coming out of her shell in some ways, in part thanks to Rory, but the focus is always on Rory and what her friends can do for her, and that's not unique to Gilmore Girls. The BFF trope is a thing for a reason. They're there to be a cheerleader or be a sounding board or show us the emotional interior of a character, and that's pretty much their sole function. And so I think as a purportedly feminist show, perhaps Gilmore could have done better in really focusing on developing all of the female characters even better, and not falling into those sort of tropes a little bit. I think they tried to avoid them, but they didn't go far enough.
Do you think that was corrected at all with what we see in the revival, or was it still just a misstep?
I think it was still a misstep. I don't think there was any course correction whatsoever. In fact, I think it probably got worse. Yeah. Paris was just sort of a dramatic caricature and was very superficial. Like, the only reason we get for her breakup from Doyle is that he's a screenwriter now, Rory, as if that's enough to dissolve a marriage where there are 2 children, which is just
horrifying.
And Lane is like a cardboard cutout in the revival. She has nothing to do except be there to listen to Rory bitch. So yeah, I think it got worse.
Yeah, I would agree. Yeah. I'll pose you one more question as we wind down this conversation, because we've been going for over an hour now. Just on the whole, within female friendships, but just within the concept of friendships in general, what are some of you think the best characteristics that a good or a best friend needs to have, and how do we best support one another within the friendships that we have with each other?
I think the first thing is really putting in that time. Spending time together, bonding it's crucial. A good solid friendship can hardly survive without that. You'll be extremely lucky if you don't do that and the friendship somehow manages to survive it. Another thing would be just always being there, always being willing to drop things at the drop of a hat, to be there for your friends when they're really in need. You need to show them unconditional support and be there to listen to them vent and listen to their secrets. And you need to sort of defend them, but also be honest with them when they're the jerk, Like, I've definitely had friends who have stepped up for me and have told other people off for their treatment of me, but they've also called me out on my crap when I needed it. And like, that's the best kind of friend you can really have.
Yeah, I would agree. I'll say too, I've been fortunate enough to have friends that call me out on my BS when I'm just in need of it. It's not always something that we love hearing in the moment, but I'm always grateful for it down the line when I'm just like, yep, I needed my friend to tell me that and to set me straight, because I need to do better. And now I can, because they've told me what was bothering them or what I was doing wrong. So I think that truthfulness in terms of friendships is also very important. It might not be the most fun thing for anyone to have to endure. It might not be a conversation that you want to have with a friend, whether you're on the giving or receiving end of it. But I think that truthfulness is important to have. And if you don't feel like you can trust your friend with that, and again, regardless of what end you're on in terms of giving or receiving that, you don't really have the most successful or best friendship that you could if you can't be honest in that way with one another. So I think that's really important too. And I feel like that's something that our Gilmore Girls women, but a lot of the women within this show, I think that's a way in which they fell short, in which they kept things close to the chest. And when they needed to have more blunt conversations with their friends because something was bothering them, they went the route of just, I want to avoid confrontation and not have problems within this friendship arise from that. So I'm just going to keep this to myself and internalize that. But that diminishes and I think is more of a detriment to your friendship than anything else. So at the end of the day, that truthfulness and that honesty needs to be there always.
Yeah, the thing that my mind goes to when you say that is Lane letting Rory basically get away with murder when it comes to sleeping with Dean.
Yep.
Rory goes to her after Lorelai gives her crap, rightly so. And she's like, Lane, I need some perspective. And Lane doesn't say anything to her about how wrong what she did was.
Yeah.
Like she's like, how was it? Was he nice to you? Like, oh my God, I can't believe that happened. But it's like, are we just all gonna gloss over the fact that Dean was
bypassing that this is a very big problem. And yeah,
and I feel like it's not the only time that it happens where, you know, Lane, and I don't think Lane was internalizing it at that moment. I think, that is something that happens where you just sort of, you don't want to rock the boat. But in that moment, I think it was just Lane's naivety.
Yep.
That did it. And that's almost as bad, where it's just like, how are you not bringing up the moral implications here? How are you not calling Rory out on her crap? It's disappointing to see someone letting their friend get away with something like that and not giving them the business, because that's what Rory needed. She needed someone to smack her upside the head and knock some sense into her. And Lorelai tried and failed. And I wonder what would have happened if Lane had done the same thing and reinforced Lorelai's view about it, because all she let Rory do was justify and explain it instead of, reckoning with it in a way that would have benefited her in the end.
Yeah, we can very easily go down a rabbit hole hypothesizing about what Rory's reaction to Lane would have been had Lane actually called her out on her nonsense in the way that she should have. But that's probably a conversation for our cheating episode when we get there. We'll have a lot of thoughts about that. But I will say that I'm in full agreement. Rory needed a friend who was going to give it to her straight and just be like, that and what you just did is absolutely not okay. And again, it just goes back to within the context of any friendship. Sometimes it means telling hard truths. And it's not something that you're going to necessarily relish doing. And your friend probably is equally not going to relish being on the receiving end of that hard truth. It may cause some divisiveness. I would hope that in most cases, it doesn't end a friendship. And I hope that two people within the course of any friendship are mature enough to realize what's being spoken to them and what's just being said. But again, just that transparency and that honesty is vital.
Yep.
I'll say this, just maybe some just two speed round questions before we close this out. Who do you think on the show had the best and healthiest female friendship, and who had the least?
Again, not a perfect example, but I think Lorelai and Suki were the healthiest on the whole, thanks largely in part to Suki's dedication to the friendship and just her general emotional intelligence that she displays. I've had this conversation with Dan before where he's like, Suki is hands down the most emotionally intelligent person on this show. She's the only one who knows what's up half the time. Not perfect, because she should have known in season 6 that Lorelai didn't want to set a wedding date because of Rory and not because of some lack of commitment to Luke. So that's, come on, you should have known better. And the least healthy, I think it's weird. I think I want to say Paris and Rory, simply because they break so many of the good friendship rules. So despite the fact that their relationship does survive that, I think they had some really toxic moments that could have ended that friendship extremely easily. And it may not be the best model for our own friendships in the real world because, there's a decent amount of betrayal and backstabbing and just the breaking of girl rules. Like, I don't know how to phrase it better than that. Rory and Lane are also not great at times. I think they let their childhood friendship status coast them through it without maybe spending enough time with each other. You really see their relationship start to fall off starting in seasons 5 through 7, especially.
Yeah.
And Rory's just really not there for Lane anymore in the ways that she needs to be.
Yep. My answers would be the same. So I'm just going to say that I echo all of that. Same and same.
Actually, another one that I want to shout out that we haven't even touched on yet. Okay, there's Act 2. Babette and Miss Patty.
Yes.
We don't really know much about their friendship, but they're just such this like perfect little duo that like don't ask questions. We'll call them perfect and leave it at that.
Mm-hmm.
And another one that actually seems pretty solid is Lucy and Olivia. Again, one that we don't get a ton of, but when it's clear that Rory has betrayed Lucy's trust, Olivia does the right thing and like steps up and gives Rory the what's up, and she's there for her friend.
Yeah. Yeah. We won't go in. I won't go into it too much, but Babette and Patty.
Yeah.
Yeah, those are some friendship goals because I think, in my mind at least, like those two women have probably been friends since childhood, or at least for a couple of decades. It just feels like it's an established thing that they've built up together, and that bond has always been there as they've grown older. So
yeah, and like sometimes they're even literally in perfect harmony. Like they sing together so often, and I think it's sort of this symbolic representation of like just how in sync they are.
Yeah. So goals. Kudos to them. Yeah, they might actually. I would just give them top billing just for like the cute, fun nature of their friendship.
Yeah.
Yeah. Any final thoughts for this one?
I mean, there's any number of things I could say. Again, the show is almost as much about friendship as it is about family. And, sometimes our friends are our chosen family. And that seems to be the case quite a bit for these women as well. So I'm sure that there will be more on the topic that will integrate into other episodes in the future. So I don't want to belabor this point because we've been going well over 75 minutes now. So let's wrap this up.
Yep. I agree. We'll talk about this more amongst other episodes and other points of conversation in future episodes. But in the meantime, what have we got coming up next?
Speaking of Rory being the asshole, that's our topic for the entire episode next week. We're going to look at some of Rory's gray area moral transgressions and do them sort of "Am I the asshole?" Reddit style.
Yeah.
And sort of break down those moments where she had an opportunity to lie or do something shady, and we've got thoughts, we've got opinions.
Yep, we do. But come back and join us for that one, because we'd love to hear your thoughts in the chat too on whether you think she actually is the asshole or whether her behavior is excusable in any way. Also, while you wait for that, go back and watch some of our old videos if you want more content. And please just remember to always do the YouTube things for us. Like this video, subscribe to our channel. We appreciate all of the support. It always helps us out, and we're grateful for every like and thumbs up, and for everyone who's here with us each and every single week.
The algorithm gods are hungry.
Yep, they are.
We appreciate it when you give them a snack.
Yep. We're hungry too, so I think we should probably go have Friday night dinner.
Yep. I agree.
So we're going to go have that. But please join us again for all of our Friday night dinners, including the one that we'll see you for next week. And have a good night until then, and a good week until then.
Bye.
Bye.